joined on the line by Tim Kennedy, a special US Army Special Forces, to discuss the blockbusting TV series Hunting Hitler. And Tim, in relation to Hunting Hitler, in relation to, I was just speaking to Robert Baer there, how did Robert approach you, or how did the opportunity arise to get involved in relation to this investigation for you?
Yeah, it's kind of a weird, funny story, honestly. We had, I'd been working in Special Forces for a while, and they were looking for someone who had hunted humans before, that could speak Spanish, that had contacts in South America, that knew how to fly drones, and was familiar with ground-penetrating radar.
Yeah. So
there's not a lot of guys that do that. It's pretty much like me and a handful of my friends.
Yeah.
They just picked me, and that was the beginning of it. And I went to hunting another one, but this one whose name was Hitler.
Yeah, and I suppose, Tim, you obviously, everyone knew about Adolf Hitler, and you probably knew the backstory in relation to the as we all know, is written in the history books, the double suicide attempt. And were you skeptical about it going into the series, or were you led to believe that surely that some Nazi troops or that would put this to bed early, and that it was going to be proven? And as the mystery went on, were you coming more and more surprised about what you were finding out?
Man, it was super challenging to sift through. There's so much misinformation out there, and there's so much confusion about what really occurred that we almost had to start from zero and go fresh. It was unlike anything anybody had ever done before, an investigation with a group of people that I think had a skill set that no one had. And so we started from square one and then tried to see where it went from there.
Yeah, and I suppose, Tim, most of your time in the investigation was spent in South America, in Argentina, and I imagine still even that time speaking about something in relation to Adolf Hitler and the Third Reich and the possibility of a Fourth Reich, as we know, being set up in Argentina. Was there a chance that you would have been met with some hostility or personal danger to your own safety and your own filming crew? Obviously, things like that, some people react very differently to it, and the idea that Argentina, as we know, their association with Germany, might be something that people might say, listen, we don't want this becoming getting out of hand.
Yeah, I mean, firstly, everyone, I love South America. I love Argentinians. I love Chileans. We're in Uruguay, we're in Paraguay, we're in Brazil, we're in Colombia. Two of my favorite places in the world. And the segments of society that I was having to deal with, it is a very small percentage of a greater, beautiful, amazing populace. Yeah. So it was kind of like a nightmare having to deal with the people we were dealing with. Yeah. And the people we were dealing with were trying to poison us, were trying to kind of infiltrate our group, our crew, and see what we were doing. Yeah. And, threats, death threats, following us at night. There were nights that we had crew members sleeping together. Legitimately, we're talking about some radical fanatics that worship and praise a mass murderer. Yeah. So, there's no other way to say it, that some of these people are insane. Yeah. And one thing that sort of fascinated me when I was watching the show and was relation to a certain place called Bar-Elish, in relation to this sort of idea that the then-time leader of Argentina, Perón, who was in talks with Bormann, who came there from Germany, could just actually give away an island and a vast area of space to the Germans and Dr. Richter, and just handed them over a blank check. And then all of a sudden, 10 or 12 years later, the Argentinians are trying to cover it up by sort of explosives and trying to get rid of all history of this taking place. Yeah, And this is where things get weird. It's clear a bunch of Nazis made it out of Germany. The Joseph Mengeles, the Adolf Eichmanns, the Skorzynskis, really nasty, disgusting people.
Yeah.
And some of them, like Richter, went on to do what they were doing before. Adolf Eichmann, before he was caught by the Mossad, he was working logistics for massive engineering companies. I mean, what he did for the Nazi Party was working logistics and killing and burning Jews.
Yeah.
But Joseph Mengele went and did after the war was practice medicine. He was conducting abortions for heads of states and, earning favors by doing these things. And Dr. Richter, who was a nuclear scientist, went on to continue what he was doing before the end of the war, which was trying to create and split the atom and make a nuclear bomb. He was just doing it for, the hopes of the Fourth Reich and trying to put Argentinians and the Nazis at the big table. And they were, the fact that Perón gave him one of the most beautiful islands in one of the most beautiful nations, in one of the most beautiful places in all of that country, and gave him a few $100 million, which is worth billions of dollars now, to follow his pursuits of nuclear ambitions. There's no question that there were bigger and higher motives here.
Yeah, and one thing in relation to, I was speaking to Robert there, was it seems to be that the Germans' influence in relation to outside of the countries that they owned, in relation to having airports in Denmark, in relation to have hydroelectric plants in Norway. But the one thing that struck me was there seemed to be the relationship between Germany and Franco in relation to that, all these massive tunnel networks in the Canary Islands, and sort of idea of an escape route that Spain could have orchestrated Hitler's escape route in relation to that. Franco sort of feeling sorry for him, but it's amazing to see that all this network of tunnels there that they could have been, it's only in the last, 20-30 years since your investigation that they've come to light. It doesn't seem to be any recollection in the history books of the Germans, this network of German operatives in Spain.
Yeah, governments lie. That's just, there's no question. The Americans have done it. Britain's done it. And Argentinians have done it. Spain has done it. And when you have ugly little secrets, like you're facilitating mass murderers escaping and not going to trial in Nuremberg, you want to hide those things. And you almost kind of understand. I mean, looking at it, you're like, man, this is an injustice. Every single one of these people should have stood trial and then been executed or worse. But we know that it happens. We know that in Benghazi, it wasn't a riot. It wasn't a bunch of people that were talking about a video made by a California. It was a bunch of terrorists trying to kill the American ambassador. And we know that both the Vatican and the Spanish governments were facilitating Nazis getting out.
Yeah.
And then the governments lied about it. And that shouldn't surprise anybody that these things happen.
Yeah, and I suppose, Tim, the one thing that I'm watching the series and what I've known to history, and the biggest question mark I have in relation to watching is the story. There's all these reports of Nazis in Germany, and there's all these reports of Hitler making his way. There's stories about Hitler's making his way to South America, but there doesn't seem to be any sort of link there to say that Eva Braun made it out of that bunker in 1945, and it seems to be, from what we're saying, that Hitler might have made the ultimate sacrifice to cover up his own death, if that's possible, by sacrificing the love of his life.
I think until we have the smoking gun, we may never really know the truth. We know what the Russians took out is not the body of Adolf Hitler.
Yeah.
That's impossible. Genetics, DNA are clearly not that of a late to middle-aged man, and that's a middle-aged woman. Now, do we know that it's Iran? No. There's no telling who it is. Is it possible that she could have died? The chaos and anarchy that was happening at the end of the war can't be understated. And the possibility possibilities of what occurred are too numerous to list. But what we can agree on is that what history says right now isn't accurate, that they are missing important details, and that makes me sad.
Yeah, and I suppose there in November we had a blockbuster sort of stories. It had all the tabloid news. It came out all everywhere that this Philip Citroen, a former SS officer, told agents that a man called Adolf Schuttelmeyer was living in a town of Tangier, 85 miles north of Bogota. I suppose these are stories that people say, well, fragmented, but the real thing was when the photo came across, and the resemblance to the man sitting beside in that photograph, it's looking very much like an adult. If it's an impersonator, it's a very good one.
Yeah, we don't hit body doubles, so by going off of just how he looks, it isn't going to be accurate or historical. I mean, I think you use facial recognition and look at photographs of his body doubles, and they would come up pretty high percentages to being Adolf Hitler himself.
Yeah.
The number of times I have heard someone tell me that they have personally seen Adolf Hitler are in the hundreds.
Right.
I've been doing this investigation for 3 years, and I have probably had 200 or 300 people give me their testimony saying that they physically saw Adolf Hitler. Now, that doesn't mean that they did. That doesn't mean anything at all. That means that they believe they saw Adolf Hitler. But people want to be attached to important historical events, and Adolf Hitler is one of the most important historical figures in human existence because of the disgusting and evil things that he did.
Yeah, and I suppose, Tim, you're a renowned US combat special forces. You have been actually down there in the ground in places like Iraq and Afghanistan in relation to the searches for Bin Laden and in relation to the searches for these cells. And when you're in a sort of war zone environment like that, in relation to where the threats can come anywhere, in relation to snipers, in relation to suicide bombers, and then you go from that extreme to going to a sort of a cold case sort of mystery there. How sort of analysis, investigation, and the thoughts that go through your head, is there certain stuff that can be applied to what you learned in relation to an actual live war zone environment that you can bring across to the investigation in relation to Adolf Hitler?
Our hunt for Bin Laden was a cold case. The last time that people had seen him before Tora Bora was years. And then from the time that we saw him in Tora Bora, and then until we finally ultimately found him in Pakistan, we're again talking a decade. So that's a cold case. A hot case happens, within 24 hours, within an hour sometimes. In personnel recovery, when somebody's kidnapped, we're talking minutes are important. The first few minutes are the most paramount in the investigation. And then as time goes on, it gets harder and harder and harder. And it was the same here. So, a great amount of time had passed, but ultimately the techniques of hunting people always remains the same.
Yeah, and you mentioned there, and I can't get across it in relation to Bin Laden in Pakistan, and it seems that the US knew where he was there for a long, long period of time, and he sort of knew and traced every bit of his movements and whereabouts. In relation to that, it intrigues me very much is the sort of the stakeout agenda, and you might know this as Special Armed Forces, but even for our listeners, they'll be intriguing. When and how does a call be made? Why go in 3 years if you know someone's there? Why not go in 6 months? Why not go in 4 years? How does that sort of work in relation to we go now or we wait if you know someone's there?
Yeah, I mean that's way above my pay grade.
Okay.
Regarding making those decisions.
Yeah.
But what I can tell you is the political stratosphere, the socioeconomic implications of taking down heads of states.
Yeah.
And let's not mince words. Bin Laden is a head of state. That between Al Qaeda, Taliban, later ISIS, Boko Haram, all of which we're talking billions of dollars in criminal money.
Yeah,
that's a head of state. And for you to knowing that he disappeared one time and we lost him for years, then we're able to find him. There's no telling whether it was months or years where we knew he was. We had to wait for the right opportunity to be able to make him not be a martyr, to make him pretty much disappear and be wiped off the face of the planet. Literally and figuratively and metaphorically. Nobody knows where he is. He was dumped into the sea. There's no monument to him. And that's all by design. And the timing of it was important. Maybe we waited too long. Maybe we didn't. There's no way to know.
Yeah, and I suppose, Tim, getting back to in relation to the Hunting Hitler and in relation to the series, I know in Ireland now and in the UK we're about to start season 3, but it seems the investigation I started a bit of research here, looking at the head of the officers, and you're looking into tracing the whereabouts more of Mengele in Chile and ex-Nazi officers like that. And is you going down to the route now of tracing his trusted henchmen in his inner circle?
Every time that we've ever caught anybody that didn't want to be found at a very, very high level, the Pablo Escobars, the El Chapos, the Bin Ladens, the Saddam Husseins, we caught them because of their connections. We caught them because of how they were moving money, how they were communicating, their couriers, and that's what we did in this season. Season 1 and 2, we are following the leads.
Yeah.
Now in season 3, we're tightening the noose. We're looking at his connections. We're looking at his infrastructure, and we are narrowing it down in this spider web to see what is at the center.
Yeah. And I suppose, Tim, that brings me on to the question. We know in the 60s or 70s, the Israeli intelligence, their own group, went into South America and they manhunted half these Nazi terrorists on their own, in relation to they were able to capture the likes of Adolf Eichmann and bring him back and stand trial and execute him. Is there a way that the cooperation could be there? I'm sure they will have an awful lot of information and detail in relation to the Nazis in South America and in relation to their movements. And is that something you're going down the line to see what sort of evidence they uncovered?
We can't, if you're looking at things that other people have discovered, if you're looking at facts that, of course we're going to take it into account, but what we don't want is the investigation to be skewed by what we already assume to be the truth. So if we have a conclusion or if we have an assumption, and then we're going to pick and choose the evidence that supports that.
Yeah. That's
not what we're trying to do. We want to be objective and try and just let the information lead to where the investigation needs to go.
Mm. And I suppose, Tim, in relation to the South American venture and in relation to the possibilities, why do you think the Argentinians sort of abandoned the sort of Fourth Reich sort of plans? Because it seemed that it was very much in their mindset to go ahead, and even if, let's say, Hitler hadn't survived, there's still the developments were still being put in place there in Argentina. Why did they go cold turkey all of a sudden and try and remove all sort of history aspects? Was it a change? Do you believe personally it was a change of heart by Perón, or?
What I think is everybody had their objectives. Perón wanted to see. While he was part of the Nazi Party and he was a fascist, he saw greatness in Adolf Hitler. As did the president of Chile, as did a whole bunch of other people that gave him power and fame and money. And people wanted to see that dream come to fruition. I mean, we're talking about men that murdered, up to maybe 12 million people in genocide. Mm. And he was able to bring and rally a nation to assist him in that. So we're talking about a charismatic person that could sweep people away. And they're going to forget truths. They're going to destroy history. They're going to do anything necessary to see that dream become realized.
Yeah, Tim, it's an amazing story. We're all enthralled here. It's got here in Ireland in relation to the Hunting Hitler series, and it makes us sort of question what we were brought up to learn and know in relation. And I suppose that for the moment, it's questions, and like for you, there'll always be, for us, there'll always be a doubt here. But the work you're doing in relation to Hunting Hitler is bringing us closer to the truth day by day. And Tim, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you here on the airwaves today. And as a real renowned a ground officer, has spent so many years in combat zones. We wish you all the best for the future, and we also wish for your safety as well, Tim.
Well, I don't care much about the safety part, but man, I really appreciate everything else. Well, thanks for having me on, and thanks for everything that you've done. And you're going to enjoy the hell out of this third season. It is incredible. It is riveting. It's captivating. It's compelling. And you just enjoy the ride, man.
Cheers, Tim. Take care, mate.